everybody. Thanks for joining us at On the Clock with Caroline Clarke. I'm so excited because we have a wonderful doctor with us today. Dr. Janet Taylor is a psychiatrist and a self-care expert. And Lord knows if we need that at any time, we certainly need everything that she brings to bear now. Janet, how are you? Thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I'm wonderful, Caroline. It's so great to see you.
So great to see you too. So listen, Janet, one of the things that keeps coming up through all of this is that constant phrase that we hear, control what you can control and let go of the rest. But when it feels like there's so little you can control and you're not even sure what that is and what it isn't, and on any given day it changes, it becomes really hard to feel like you have much choice at all. So when we talk about choosing calm in a situation like this, what does that even begin to mean?
So what it begins to mean is to understand how our brains work. And if you think about our brain like this, like if you looked at your hand, just made a fist, right? And the back is our reptilian brain, and that's what drives us to the fear and fright, freeze, that whole flight or fight. Yeah. And so in times of uncertainty, our brain is hijacking us back there. Like you have to do something, you have to do something, you have to do something. In the middle of our brain, the midbrain is where emotion and memory is. And that aspect also is like, this happened before or didn't happen. I don't know, that whole uncertainty. But our key aspect of our brain and what our brains are ready for and keep us ready for are our frontal cortex. That's where we establish control. That's where executive functioning is. That's where we can have that sense of calm in the midst of chaos. So the key thing is to know that uncertainty that we're feeling is real. In times of not knowing information, our brains want us to know, our brains want us to be safe, and it will take us places, it will forecast us, it will make up situations. And the key thing is to bring back into what real information we have. And so in times of chaos, you can believe that you can get the calm that you need by taking some time, let your brain do its work. And when you feel that franticness, pull back to what you know. So in that regard, it may mean making a budget so you know what's real and coming into your household. It may mean establishing resources. It may mean just really having those concrete parts of our lives that we need to be secure, whether it makes us uncomfortable or not, that we have that. So real information is what we need right now.
And so that's part of the dilemma, right? Because I think I understand what you're saying, but as you talk about reaching for those things that you can really grab hold of, I think a lot of us, our normal impetus would be go to the news, right? Like you're seeking strong information that you can rely on, that you can sort of sink yourself into. And yet it's hard to know what we can rely on in the news. And then some of what we can only makes it harder to deal with. So how do we rectify that?
Well, just because things are hard don't mean that we don't need to know them, but it's really about reliable sources. So the CDC.gov, presumably, we hope, is reliable. But I mean, facts like that, if knowing the signs and symptoms of COVID-19 and knowing where you can get a test or get an antibody test, and now certainly not to the extent it should be, but they are certainly offering more free tests, having your doctor's number on speed dial, knowing your symptoms. So informing yourself like that. I'm not talking about scaring yourself. And then also knowing when it's time to shut off the news. There's not much on the news that we need to see 24 hours a day anymore. So you need to decide where you can go, where you feel comfortable, and get the right information.
Yeah, I think the testing piece is certainly, it seemed like it was going to be a bit of a solution, and there's much more testing. I know a lot of churches across the country, particularly in Black communities, have stepped up to testing, which is great. But, I'm someone who suspects I had it, wasn't able to be tested because my symptoms were fairly low grade and they weren't testing people like me. And now I think, okay, I should get the antibody test just so that I have a sense of, but then you read all this stuff that says the antibody tests aren't reliable. And so, I don't want to have a false sense of security. And we don't even know what really knowing that you have the antibodies means. So how do you navigate all of these consistent, yes, you can, no, you can't. Yes, it's important. No, it's not. How does one decide on their own what to choose?
So you have to decide what's important to you. For some, it may be your physical health, which certainly is important. And it's not that every antibody antibody test is unreliable. It's just you need to know the source of yours. And what's not known is, even if you test positive for antibodies, how much that protects you in the long haul. We just don't know. But that being said, it's still more important than no. Not. So establishing where you're going to get that antibody test. The other, it may be your psychological health and being able to check in and know you're okay. And it doesn't mean that that's outside of you, but when you wake up, take an inventory. How am I feeling? What do I need to do to get myself to feeling better? Am I interested in what I normally used to do? So really managing your moods. The other is, if taking care of other people is important to you, knowing how other people are, checking in. But the most important part of your health right now is yourself. And it's not being selfish, but it's really about what do I need to do to take care of me? And let the other adults take care of themselves, but really focusing on what you need so that you can have peace of mind. And it's no guilt allowed right now. It is every man on deck, but you need to take care of yourself.
You mentioned checking in at the beginning of each day, which sounds like something that's doable for everyone, that will sort of allow you to begin the day at a baseline that's healthy and makes sense for you. Are you seeing in your practice, and I know you've been working around the clock, are you seeing patterns in terms of the days of the week? Are there days when we should be more mindful? Are there moments in the day when we should be more mindful with really checking in on ourselves in that way?
Mm-hmm. Well, there's two parts to that question. We should always be mindful every single moment. That's what mindfulness is. And it's not like mindful, like I'm on top of the world. Mindfulness is when you just take that inventory and how you're feeling. And if you're feeling great, accept it. If you're feeling bad, accept that too, and allow that moment to go. And also do what you need to do to alleviate your own suffering. That's what mindfulness is. So my opinion, we should be doing that 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. It's interesting, my patients, I work with a patient population that is low resourced, has a lot of challenges anyway. And I've been amazed at the resilience of my patients because they have always had to find a way. And this is one more thing. They're taking care of themselves. A small percentage will say they're really, really afraid and are isolating, but it has really brought me great confidence to know that by and large, they're taking care of themselves. The ones who are really anxious and isolated anyway are like, now you guys all know what I feel like, so I'm good. And the ones who are depressed and sad are monitoring their health, but almost every single one of my patients, Caroline, no matter how difficult it's been for them, at the end of the conversation, they say, how are you doing? And I think that connectedness, that willingness to care for someone else in spite of your own pain is what we all can be doing too. Not to the extent that it causes you great distress or burnout, but just knowing that in this difficult time, if you want to feel better yourself, do something for someone else.
Yeah, I think that, we have a tendency some moments to focus on the difficulties, obviously, and it is important to be mindful around those. But I think also this is very clearly bringing out a lot of positive things in people. What are the sorts of traits that you're seeing generally that you think are helping us to maneuver through this in a way that is perhaps better than you would have imagined, and that makes you optimistic for how we're going to come out on the other side of it?
Well, the traits that I'm seeing are people's curiosity about themselves and how they want their lives to be moving forward. I think having a shelter in place, not being able to run to the mall or go wherever you want to eat has brought back a simplicity for people, not to minimize those who have trouble finding something to eat and not to minimize those who have lost jobs and have housing insecurity. But it really is a time when people are looking within themselves and saying, how do I want to be? So establishing a new sense of purpose, reaffirming values. Families are spending more time together and having to negotiate boundaries for better or worse, but working it out, communicating a different way, certainly being more mindful of being able to reach out to elderly parents or family members or neighbors and checking on them. So I think beyond the initial shock of this new normal that we're living in is really a sense of kind of one-to-one and getting back to really caring about each other. And I'm not saying that in a glass half full way, because we still have a lot of challenges in the United States of America, but I have found that people are tending to be more compassionate and empathic towards others, and that's a good thing. Now, do we need to do more? Yes. Part of that is wearing a mask. When you wear a mask, you're not wearing a mask against other people as much as you are to protect them against you, because we know that almost 40% of people who could have COVID are either pre-symptomatic, they haven't developed the symptoms yet, or asymptomatic. So it extends some common grace that you want to protect other people. And we can certainly do more of that, washing your hands, staying home when you're sick. But by and large, I feel more just hopeful and energized, and really kind of looking forward to what we can develop in terms of knowing ourselves and how to reach other people after this and through this, which may last for a lot longer than we know.
Yeah. Family dynamics is something that's coming up a lot. So whether you have been living alone throughout this, which is its own very unique reality, right? Can be very isolating and difficult. Whether you're just part of a couple that maybe hasn't spent that much time together and suddenly it's constant. Whether you have adult children who've come back, which is a lot of it. A lot of adults, younger adults have gone back home very suddenly and unexpectedly, and families are trying to navigate those dynamics. Or you have very young children and now you're teaching them, you're doing everything. Do you feel that, is it your sense that people are reaching new levels of understanding that are really going to be sustainable beyond this? Or, a lot of people are just really, really struggling and not finding healthy ways through it?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's no question, again, when, domestic violence has gone up, because people are contained and can't hide what maybe used to be an escape, going to work or going to school or doing something. And so that certainly is a concern. At the same time, reports to children's services have gone down because schools, teachers, other people may not notice what's happening within households. So I think at extreme ends, there's the potential for emotional and physical violence that will have to be dealt with. Needs to be dealt with now, and certainly post-COVID, and can last a lifetime. And we want to be mindful of that. At the same time, families are having to work it out and hopefully communicate in different ways, learn to tolerate each other in different ways, learn to help out in other ways. Adult children, I mean, I have mine who have come home and they regress. And you have to go, wait, are you 15 again? What? So certainly, just being mindful of what stressful periods can do, and certainly can highlight how people can make themselves feel better, which is maybe they need more attention from mom or dad, or seem a little more needy. And as adults, so do we. So I think there's some introspection going on, but for the most part, families are finding a way to work it out. And again, realizing that family within that four walls, or even if you were living by yourself, reaching out to extended family or your friends, I mean, that's who you have. And there's some, I think, concrete familiarity and some lasting dependence on who has your back. And I think that can be helpful for folks. But yes, I mean, my hope is that, we continue to learn. If we didn't continue to learn as humans, why try? And so my hope is that we will take some parts of our communication that have helped with us and leave the ones that are ineffective or destructive behind.
The age group that we've been most concerned about physically is our elders, right? We're very concerned about the older population, and certainly the majority of deaths have been there. Is there an age group that you are most concerned about from an emotional health and long-term well-being standpoint?
I would say the age group that I'm most concerned with right now are young people who, from 5, to 18. I've talked to mothers who have preschoolers and first grade kids who miss their friends. They don't understand. They want to play, and play is so crucial at this time period. They just don't get it. So they're developing a lot more anxiety. have regressed in a little bit more major ways. And also, I mean, as much as we've been told that COVID-19 primarily affects individuals with pre-existing conditions, we have to be worried about what's happening to our kids that I think is probably being underreported by the federal government for their own reasons. And certainly people on the front line are seeing that. So those younger age groups, and also not to mention what happens at school when you learn to share, you know, when you have things that are expected of you, just all those patterns that kids are missing. And not to mention what 40% of our kids, you know, maybe that's the only meal they get is at school. So in that regard, and then being home where families are stressed and under-resourced, I worry about them. A lot of our young people dependent on summer youth for jobs are not going to have that. And so what happens to them financially? And then with the adolescents and kids who are about to graduate and have not been turning in their work. And so suddenly they may not graduate, or their families are dependent upon them, you know, their jobs that they have at fast food restaurants and whatever they do for their household. So they have a lot of stress and anxiety as well. And historically, I mean, only 64% of our adolescents get the mental health services that they need. So you just really, I worry about what's happening to them. Really
so what can parents do then to help their children? And in particular, what can parents do who don't have access? You know, I've spoken with people who are dealing with emotional situations at home where they fully recognize they need help. They want the help, but the therapist that they used to have now is overbooked. They can't get into the schedule to do telemedicine. You know, maybe they just don't know of another resource. What can we do without professional help, and what can we do to help find professional help at a time when the system is so overstressed?
So without professional help is certainly you want to take care of your own mental health, because you don't want to project your own anxiety and anger or aggression on your children or anyone living in your household. So kind of take your own temperature first, and then check in with your kids and you know, your adolescents. We know teenagers can be sullen and certainly can be quiet, but just check in. And so that may mean a nightly check-in for literally 5 or 10 minutes. How's your day? What did you learn? What do you want to talk about? Any concerns? No judgment, but just hearing them. And then notice if their sleep patterns have changed a lot, if their moods have changed, if, you know, whatever your child, however they usually are, which we know.
Patterns, yeah.
Yeah, to look at those patterns, it's really important. And the other thing is there's lots of help. If you can't get into your doctor, SAMHSA has a 1-800 number. There's a number of lines that you can call for telemedicine and telehealth if you need help. And worst case, you know, you can call non-emergent 911 numbers. They can give you help and check in. I mean, because most medical offices are still open. So check in with your pediatrician, your own doctor, but those resources are there.
I know one of the things that you were working on even before COVID was something that you call Reset, which sort of gives people very specific, sort of systematic way to move through anything. But certainly it really would be helpful at a time like this. Can you kind of give us a sense of what Reset is, what it means, and how we can make it work for us?
Sure. I mean, as you mentioned, 60% of Americans were stressed and higher in some cases before COVID. But Reset really looks at how can you take a time like this where there's a crisis and reframe your body physically, reframe your mind psychologically, and then emotionally, spiritually, what do you need to do? So the R in Reset is to recover and reflect, which means when we're greatly stressed, our body needs time to recover. What does that mean? This is a time to focus on your sleep patterns, to exercise, to mindfully eat, and to really try to balance yourself with positive thinking, because our brains, again, will hijack us into that negative worst case. It's our responsibility to bring that back to positive things. So you can reflect on times that you have overcome something that was really challenging, which we all have, and build on that as you move forward. The E is for evidence-based thoughts. As you mentioned, there's a lot of misinformation in the news, Twitter, wherever you get your information. You want something that's based in facts and real. So you can go to cdc.gov, Mayo mayoclinic.gov, research and look at the source of information so that you can find that out. And not just for healthcare, even for budgets. If you're stressed financially, look at your budget, look at what you need to do and get that help. The S is for self-care. And self-care is when we recognize that we're suffering and we're feeling something that we need to do for ourselves and take that time to do it. It may be saying no to something. One of my favorite sayings is no is a complete sentence. It may be asking for help, just whatever you need to do. Schedule yourself in for, if it's 30 minutes a day to just really take care of yourself. The E is for establish control. Find those things from a physical standpoint, performance, and psychological that you have under your control, that you can reach your hand out to. So you're not so dependent on other things that you have no idea what can happen. And then lastly is for togetherness while distancing. It's so important that we stay connected, which means a text, a phone call, Zoom, whatever it takes to help you feel connected. And that is really imperative upon ourselves to do those things for ourselves so that we don't wallow in what feels like quicksand and really can take those little steps and reestablish our agency and our resilience and what we have within us to turn one bad moment into something better.
I love that. I love everything about that. I hope, everybody was there with taking notes because it's clear and it's concise and it's so supremely doable. And I think finding things in this moment that are just doable, that feel really helpful in a tangible way is so important when the uncertainties are so massive and ever changing. I think one of the things that you talked about in terms of reaching out to other people, I know a lot of people are really checking on friends, particularly those who are alone or those who they know have been ill or are dealing with particularly stressful situations. We're doing a lot of Zooming, a lot of FaceTiming and calling and so forth. But, sometimes I think there are two things in play that can be difficult. One is the sort of competitiveness around resiliency and wellness, right? We tend to get competitive in all things in our culture. And when you see people, particularly on social media, they've lost 20 pounds during this on purpose. They've built enormous strength. They've cleaned their entire place. They've written a book. They've written, whatever they've done, right? They've started a new business that's thriving. It can make you feel like you're just not doing enough, or somehow everybody's nailing this. They're making the hours count, as we say, on the clock. And you just feel like you're in the midst of everything else, you're failing at this. How do we really sort of measure how we're making these hours count and not get into a mindset of beating ourselves up for not being productive enough, maybe at work some days, or not being kind enough to the people we're living with at every moment, or, whatever the pressures that we put on ourselves. How do we sort of alleviate that while still making sure that we, do respond as well as we can in this?
Yeah, no, it's a great question because, part of our nature is to be the best that we can, right? And that's where we can really utilize the beauty of how our brain works. Our brain works to keep us safe, to identify threat, and to help us have more rewards. So if we recognize that looking at social media, comparing ourselves to other people, like it feels like a threat to us because it makes us anxious and, it drives, our brains, our body heart starts beating and we get more anxious. Like it seems simplistic. Stop doing that. Go for your reward, which is to, again, establish what's under your control, have small goals that you set. Part of maturity is that you're able to stop comparing yourself to other people. At the same time, you can be happy for them. And there's no better time for this because at any moment you can read about someone or even talk to someone who's doing worse than you. You can read about people who are doing better than you, but this is about you and what you need to do so that you don't get so caught up that you don't do anything. So if you want to do more, write out small, doable goals, maybe 2 or 3 a day that are very simple. If you haven't been working out, maybe the first day you get your clothes organized to work out. The second day you walk for 10 minutes. Check it off and keep building on it. Because at the end of the day, and the right mindset is all up to you. It's all up to us. And so having a growth mindset, having a mindset that doesn't keep you back is all within your power. And it gets back to what I started talking about at the beginning is our frontal cortex. Like thinking about what we want and doing it and really utilizing it in a way that brings you peace. And so you're not using your mind to cause yourself your own distress. There's enough pain out there already. So it's
Yeah.
up to you what you choose.
For those who are in positions of leadership in business, and I would argue that every single person is in a position of leadership, right? Especially now, we all have the ability to impact and influence each other really in ways that before we might not have, because no one has all the answers, and we're very clear on that. So as we go about those things, whether it's in our homes or in our work context, how do we lead and make decisions that we can feel confident about, particularly when those decisions are not just impacting us, but they're impacting others. How do we make those decisions in a way that we really can feel confident? There is a tendency now when we're sort of oversaturated with this reality to want to open the gates, get out there. There is this movement, right? To open up, to get out, to say enough is enough. We can do this. And then there are a lot of people who are really, really afraid and struggling with anxiety all around any sort of reentry. So as people make decisions for their families, for their colleagues, about transitioning to some next, even if it's not our ultimate. How do you advise people on what that decision-making process looks like so that they really know they've taken everything into account that they should and land in a place where they can feel confident even within what continues to be uncertainty?
So, there's two ways to look at that. One is context and one is consciousness. And both are rooted in what's known as deliberate calm. And the deliberate calm is in our frontal cortex, that metacognition, where you're thinking about thinking. So individuals and their families need to look at what resources they have. If you're in New York City or someplace where it has been the epicenter, I think there's a lot more decisions that you have to make. At the same time, you can't stay inside forever. But it's going to be when you go outside, have you talked to your kids and yourself about social distancing? Do you have a mask? Not to be in crowded places where you're closed in, because what we know about the COVID-19 and the virus is the louder people talk, the more droplets that are come out. So if you're like in a football stadium or basketball, stadium where people are yelling at a crowded bar, like those are not situations that you want to be in. So you want to take yourself out. How safe and secure do you feel about your children's school, workplace, things like that? You make those decisions, which are not done reactively. Again, not in our reptile brain where it's like, oh my gosh, fight or flight, but thinking about what the real resources are. And so deliberate calm comes if you think about Captain Sully, how he landed the plane on the Hudson, and the air controllers were saying you have to make it 10 miles. He knew he couldn't. He used his training, he used his practice to do that. We have that capacity, and it's about weeding out the noise and focusing on what's important to you, focusing on your values, and knowing that you have the skills to do that. And then the context is how we present ourselves, making a message when we're talking to our families and leading, whether it's ourselves and other people, that's congruent with our values, where we care as much about them as they care about us, and letting them know that is important. And so it is about being thoughtful. It's making actions and decisions that are consistent with your purpose and values, knowing that if you make a mistake, you can evaluate it and change it. And so it's really highlighting what's worked and then working and fixing what's failing, which means at the end of the day, you might have to look at what worked and what didn't, and also being willing to listen to what your partner may have to say, what your kids have to say, and incorporating that into the decision. So it's not a unilateral decision, but one where you keep your family first, but make it on evidence-based realities that you have.
You talk about deliberate calm. We started out talking about choosing calm. How important is it really to make that choice, to prioritize calm as a notion? right? Versus panic. Can you kind of talk about what is the difference when we respond, when we try to live and embrace a calmness versus, you know, impulsive action, or allowing ourselves to just sort of keep frittering along at this level that is, you know, agitated and anxious and not calm? Why does it matter? Long question, Janet. Why does it matter
Yeah.
that we choose calm, that we choose to prioritize deliberate calm?
So, I mean, from a body standpoint, chronic stress is killing us. Chronic stress is one of the reasons why Black people especially died, you know, not at higher rates, because we know if you're under resourced, you're an essential worker, you, no matter, you're tired, you're underpaid, you don't get sick leave, and you have to get on that train or bus or subway to get to that work, and the toll that it takes on your body. So being calm is when you manage your stress. Not to say that we can't be in conditions that are stressful, but we need balance. So when you have high stress, you have high input, you need to find a way to get back to baseline. And calm is at baseline. So if you don't know what it feels like to be calm, if you just tense yourself up for 20 seconds, like every single muscle, and then relax, that feeling, that's what we all should have scribed for. And the way to do that is when you feel yourself tense, that you relax yourself. But again, it begins and ends in our brain. Our brain right now is going everywhere and making us feel jittery. It's going to uncertainty. But we have that opportunity to take some deep breaths, to focus on what we want, to think about the decisions that we're making from our health standpoint, not to react to everything, the news that we choose to expose to and get, and bring ourselves back to that. Because being chaotic is easy. The calm part is hard. So you're deliberate about it, you think about it, you pray about it, you meditate, whatever it takes to get you to where you need to be so you can make the best decision that you can, with also not beating up on yourself if you don't. I mean, we all make mistakes, but just choosing that, wanting that, means that we can have it. And again, now that we're home, not that home necessarily is a great source of comfort for us. I mean, you're homeschooling kids, you're worried, but we have to find those opportunities just to take that breath and feel that calm. And it's there.
Yeah.
But we need it as we're making more decisions.
Let's be real. A lot of people are choosing to find calm by self-medicating.
Yes, yes.
And there's a whole lot of, you know, people thinking calm is in a bottle. So I'm not trying to judge, but how concerned are you about the sort of self-medication route, and what can people do to self-evaluate that piece and try to right-size it?
You know, it's all about positive coping, right? And so there's no question. I think alcohol sales have also gone up for a number of reasons. But, you know, alcohol is a depressant. People think it helps them sleep. It doesn't. It can make you sluggish, make you gain weight, and make you not do those positive things that can help give you balance. So if you find that, you know, when you finish your work day at home and you log off Zoom or whatever you're doing, and you're having 4 or 5 glasses or a bottle of wine or whatever your drug of choice is,
Yeah.
be aware of it, and then just try to cut back and really focus on what you are trying to establish. And if what you're trying to establish is some peace and relaxation, try something else. Reading a book, going for a walk, talking to your partner, you know, finding something positive in your life so that you don't find that you're overcompensating with negative coping behaviors. But a lot of people are right now. And hopefully as people can get out and walk and do more and find that they're not alone in this, that most people are suffering and having to adjust, then you can use more positive coping skills. But when you recognize it, do something about it. I'm not concerned that it's going to create anything over the long haul, but this is going to be over the long haul. So people have to start reevaluating, like, and realizing when you need to enter for yourself back into this world, because we can't stay in forever. And if we find that we're staying in and coping in a negative way, then we really have to identify those patterns.
We've talked a lot about what we can all do for ourselves, and that's so critical. But before we go, you know, I think as we do reach out to friends and elders and our children and loved ones, we're all doing a lot of absorbing other people's stress, right? So let's say you kind of have a handle on yours and you're choosing calm and you kind of got your tools in place that are getting you through the day. but then you are carving out time to talk to other people, and you're just, taking in their stress, their anxiety, their fear, their worries, which can take you to a whole other place. But you don't want to stop reaching out. How, you're someone, you spend your whole life listening to people and helping guide them through some of the most difficult things that they experience. So you're absolutely expert on this. How do we remain there for each other without, sort of tumbling into the places that the people we care for may be, as we're trying to pull them out instead of pulling them out, we're sinking into those places. How do you guard against that?
Well, it's so important because vicarious trauma is real. And to our brains, even though we haven't experienced that direct trauma, hearing about it, feeling it so empathically, not being able to sleep can create the same level of stress in us. So it's not that you can't listen to other people, but you can do a couple of things. One is to become a little more Teflon. You know how water rolls off Teflon? You hear it, but you don't absorb it. And especially for adults, my feeling is most adults know what they need to do for themselves. Sometimes they have to do it. We can't fix it for them, which goes back to reestablishing control and your own control of what you can do. It's not about throwing money at them, even though most people will take it. It's not about over empathizing. If you have friends who are depressed and suicidal, you have to know your level and your limit when you need to bring other people in or when you need to get outside people involved. Don't hesitate to do that. But also, if you find that you're someone who is always, some people seek out, the bad stories in people, and, it makes them feel better, or they want to be pseudo-therapists. But if that's you, you have to empty your cup. After you talk to someone, you need to do whatever you can do to replenish it yourself. One of the things I say, because you're right, I do talk to and hear lots of stories, is, I didn't give birth to people. I know that people are creative and resourceful and whole. I believe in most individuals' capacity to heal themselves. And so my goal and my training is to help them realize their own strengths, I can't just give it to them. And we know that when you earn something and learn something yourself, it's more likely to stick with you. So if you find that you are just depleted at the end of a call or exhausted, then stop calling people as much and really realize what you need to do to get yourself feeling whole and hopeful and resilient, because it's key. But it can be really depleting. But again, this is going to last for a while. And if not this, there's always something else. But most people know where they can get help.
Like you said, this is going to go on for a while. It's clearly a marathon, definitely not a sprint. So as you look at what everyone is enduring and the road ahead, is there one thing as a psychiatrist, as a mental health professional, a self-care expert, is there one thing that if you could make a wish that everyone can and would just work on themselves during this time, what would that thing be?
So it'd be two things, and I'll take the liberty of two. The first, thank you, Caroline. The first is just to realize our power within us. Like, we are born with everything that we need. And sometimes it just gets layered with, disappointments and separations and just stuff. Like, peel that off and find the best of what you have, because it's there. And that may take work. For some of us, it's easier than others. It may take therapy. It may take others telling you what they see in you, but really be determined to know that thing that you have that can get you step by step, because you have it. And the second thing is to vote. Use your power to vote, because right now policies related to our healthcare, related to our economic health, related to, our financial health, related to, this despair that some of us feel is real. So vote, 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 and find that thing within you that just ignites everything that's already there.
That is so brilliant. And I'm sure it's the last thing people thought that you were going to say, because no, really, I mean, this. I don't think people attach their mental and emotional health to voting. And in our community, in the Black community, where we are being hit so hard by this, this is such a critical time. And I just don't think we're making that connection. What do you say to those in the Black community who, frankly, this entire thing has made them, question the sanctity of the vote more, whether it matters or not more? What do you say to combat some of that resistance and some of that thinking that makes us just go to places that say, forget about it?
Mm-hmm. So, as Black people, our health has been pathologized and used against us. And everything that we do related to voting, our education, access to healthcare, finances, only I think 10% of Black people, maybe less, can afford to work from home. But 40% of people across the board don't have paid benefits for sick leave. Those are all factors that are related to legislation and policy, right? There's so many things. So our power, part of our power is going to be at the voting booth. And we know that as Black people, they know it. So get inspired and do that. Do whatever you can to, because it really, our health is related to economics, to education, to being in a low resource environment, being arrested, serving in jail or prison. There's so many factors. It's not just that we are more diseased. It's been how we have been discriminated against in policy, racism, all those factors. So take care of yourselves physically, take care of yourselves spiritually, take care of yourself psychologically, and get out and vote and get other people to vote. It's critical.
It's the most empowering thing, right? Really, at the end of the day. Janet, thank you so much. Have a great day. Stay safe and stay well.